Welcome everybody. We are live from Europe this week on the SynBioBeta SynbiCITE webinar. I'm live in Paris this week, and I'm joined live from London by the co-directors of SynbiCITE, which is the UK synthetic biology translation engine. First of all, I'd like to welcome Dick Kitney, who's a professor at Imperial College, and he's the co-director of SynbiCITE. Welcome, Dick.
Thank you very much, John. Great to be here.
And I'm also joined live by Paul Fremont, who's at his office at Imperial College London, and he's the co-director of SynbiCITE. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, John. Good to be here.
So today on the webinar, we have a whole host of different data that we're going to be running through. In particular, we have the Q2 funding update, which we just launched. So I've got a few slides that I'm going to talk you through as we go through this webinar. And in particular, we're going to show the Q2 funding update, which we just put in the webinar this morning. And what it showed was a huge amount of funding that's just gone into the industry. So I'm just going to show you my slides. You should be able to see them on your screens at home now. And focusing on the amount of money that was raised, which was over $925 million. And that's almost double from the second quarter of 2017. And in the first quarter of 2018 was 650 million raised. Now we're at 925 million. So that brings a total of over $1.5 billion that was raised by over 58 companies in the industry. Dick, I wanted to pass over to you. Can you tell me why you think we're seeing almost a doubling of the investment from 2017 to 2018?
Well, I think one of the exciting things that's happening is that a lot of governments are putting a lot of emphasis on synthetic biology as a technology development. And I think this sort of public-facing investment is beginning to really, I think, start delivering opportunities for translation, if you like. So I think there's been a growing, massive kind of acceleration in synthetic biology research around the world, particularly in the US and the UK. And that clearly is feeding into a lot of fantastic ideas and opportunities, which are now being translated, if you like, into companies, investment and growth. So I think that's kind of one aspect of why I think we're seeing such a huge influx in investment.
So I'm showing the chart at the moment that shows the growth of global investment since 2009, which is when we started tracking in our company database. And you can see about $100 million was invested in 2009. We had a dip in 2014, but that was the only year that we haven't seen an increase in the global investment. So I think it's interesting now looking at it. And you can see in the 2018 chart, we have the $1.5 billion there in the dark blue, and in the light blue, we have the projected total for the year. So if the pace continues from Q1 and Q2, then we're set to see over $3 billion go into this industry in 2018. Dick, you've been in this industry now for over a decade. So I think you've been predicting this influx of investment for quite some time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, at least a decade, if not longer. Well, 17 years to be exact.
And so what do you think's changed in the investment climate over the last couple of years that we're seeing global investment? And we're going to come to the UK investment because it's not just the US here, it's significant amounts of money being raised by the UK as well.
Okay, can I just say I'm happy to try and answer these questions, but there's a bit of breakup in terms of the connection. So having said that, I think the key change is the great interest by various companies, various governments around the world, particularly in the US and UK, in terms of the bioeconomy. So they see the bioeconomy as a key driver of the overall economy, and synthetic biology, I think, is seen on both sides of the Atlantic as an important driver of the bioeconomy. And I think the fact that there's now a much stronger base in terms of R&D, etc., as Paul was saying a couple of minutes ago.
Excellent. So if we look at the next slide, we can see all of the companies that make up that 925 million. And it's actually a UK company that tops that with an IPO by Autolus. Now, Autolus is a gene therapy cell engineering company. Next, you can see the second up there on the list is Impossible Foods. That's the company that's making beef burgers without the beef, plant-based beef. You can see Synthorx. That's a company that's making non-canonical nucleic acids for pharmaceutical applications. Twist Bioscience, also a DNA synthesis company. We've got a few companies that are organism platform companies like Codexis we're seeing, and Ginkgo. And we have companies that are in the software space like Benchling. Now, we also see some other UK companies on the list. We see Synpromics. Paul, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Synpromics and what they do.
Well, I think Synpromics are I would call almost like a really clear synthetic biology company in the sense that they're designing synthetic promoters and for obviously for industrial purposes. And I think they've started off growing slowly, but they've suddenly really accelerated recently. As I think what we're seeing is that big industries really now beginning to engage with the technology. And I think as big industry starts really engaging with this technology, companies like Synpromics, which is what we would call a small, medium enterprise, a small company, if you like, are really now beginning to get traction into new customers, new opportunities. And that then allows more investment into their particular space. So I think it's a sort of maturing, if you like, of the technology. And companies like Synpromics who have been, pushing hard on the idea of libraries of synthetic promoters and other types of design tools for essentially for protein expression are now getting traction in the market, which I think is great.
Excellent. And I'm seeing another UK company on the list, 3F Bio. They're also making a meat replacement product using fermentation. And as I'm here in Paris, I see 3 French companies on the list: Dinovair, 4 French companies: Inobrac, DNA Script, and Pili, which is making sustainable inks and dyes. So there's definitely a lot of growth in the industry and a lot of growth that we're seeing in investments from Europe. I just want to again highlight some of the UK companies. We have Oxybio. Oxybio is making 3D printing for tissue culture, and we have Evenetics, and Evenetics is another DNA synthesis company. And we have Procarium, and Procarium. Dick, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Procarium is doing.
Yeah, so Procarium is a really company which we've supported actually for a number of years now, and they actually focus on producing vaccines which essentially operate from the gut, which appears to be much more effective. And in fact, they started off with the vaccine for chlamydia, which I think is certainly in clinical trials now. But they're also moving on to other types of vaccines, even against things like plague. So interesting company, and it's a very interesting technology because it's not a systemic vaccine or an intramuscular vaccine. It actually is a vaccine which is produced in the gut.
Excellent. And Ted Feldman, the CEO of Procarium, will be speaking at SynBioBeta in October, so you can learn more about the various different application areas that they're working on. So moving on, this is new data that we haven't shown before, and we looked at all the companies, the 520 companies that we have in the synthetic biology database, and we looked at the hotspots for the synthetic biology industry. So unsurprisingly, there's a large group of them in the United States. The majority are in the United States. The majority of those in California, 302, followed up with 82 from our database that are residing in the UK. 21 in Canada, 20 in France, 12 in Switzerland, 11 in Germany, 11 in Ireland, and 10 in the Netherlands. So really interesting analysis. It shows UK is the number 2 in the growth area for synthetic biology companies. And if you look at the total number of companies that are forming, now over 520 companies in the industry today. We haven't got yet updated figures for 2018, but we will have by the time the October event comes around. So now we have slightly different categories and different ways of measuring. So the SynbiCITE also has its own internal data with 146 synthetic biology startups, growth between 2000 and 2016. So Dick, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about SynbiCITE's role in the UK, and then a little bit about this this survey that you did last year.
Okay, so SynbiCITE's role in the UK is that we are the UK National Industrial Translation Centre. We're funded by public money, and our role is to support essentially to support startups and SMEs to get them to grow. We do this in a number of ways. First of all, we inject public money to startups and SMEs. We also give scientific and technical support within SynbiCITE, particularly for, again, startups and SMEs. And then the third area where we provide companies with a lot of support is in terms of business courses of various kinds. So the idea is that SynbiCITE supports startups and SMEs not only in terms of the science and engineering, but also in terms of developing business acumen. And that's been, I think, really quite a successful strategy. Yeah.
Excellent.
And second question.
If you look at the slide on synthetic biology startups in the UK, that was from the SynbiCITE's annual synthetic biology startup.
Yeah, from the survey
that you started. I wondered if you could just talk us through some of the data
Yes.
that you found from that survey.
Certainly. So we decided early last year that we would develop a survey for our startups and SMEs in the UK to look at growth and to look at the way growth has occurred. And as John says, it depends how you measure it, but we reckon that we have about 146 SMEs, startups and SMEs, which have really come into creation and stabilized between 2000 and 2016. And in the UK, the number of synthetic biology companies that we have has doubled every year over the last 5 years. It's kind of interesting to note that we divide these companies into two different categories. We divide them into what we call tech transfer startups and non-tech transfer startups. So just to explain that, tech transfer startups come out of universities through the tech transfer office, and non-tech transfer startups basically spontaneously create, if I can put it that way. And the interesting thing is that we are now seeing that the non-tech transfer startups are now beginning to exceed in number the tech startup transfer companies. Overall, there's been an investment of well over, in pounds, 620 million pounds, which represents 56 million of public money against 560 odd million of investments since 2010 from the private sector, which is very encouraging.
Now, the science councils in the UK have been funding a lot of basic research in synthetic biology, in particular around DNA synthesis, and we've seen a flurry of activity in new DNA synthesis startups out of the UK. So are you expecting to see the tech transfer startups maybe get a bump as that research starts to get commercialized, or do you think you'll continue to see this pattern of more of the non-tech transfer startups growing?
Well, actually, I think there are two phenomena that we're going to see here. The first phenomenon is that I think we are going to see this bump you're referring to in terms of public investments. So I think that's going to produce a further increase in tech transfer companies. But in addition to that, in terms of non-tech transfer, what we are absolutely observing, and this is even since the survey came out, is that we have significant additional inward investment into the UK into non-tech transfer companies. So I think we're seeing different phenomena going on here, but what the overall effect is to increase the whole area of startups and SMEs in the UK.
Excellent. And for those of you watching at home, if you have any questions about any of this data or questions about particular trends or companies, then you can type them into the Q&A box on the webinar, and towards the end, we'll be taking some live Q&A. So moving on to going a bit deeper on the UK startup ecosystem for synthetic biology. Paul, also from the report that you put out last year, you looked at these 6 different application areas. Yeah. I wonder if you could just comment on them and give us an overview of the different areas that you're seeing in the UK.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you can see from the slide, John, it's quite a good mix actually. But obviously, we've got more companies in the tools and services part of the development, and I think that's kind of consistent with the idea of a very early stage, very rapidly growing technology, where a lot of companies are developing technical abilities, if you like, technologies and services that could feed the drive of synthetic biology. And I suspect some of those companies will morph into more product-focused companies in the future. For example, Lab Genius is probably one that will morph into a more product-focused opportunity. But it's good to see spread. I mean, we've got companies in chemicals, biopharma, as you can see, some software companies that are coming up, desktop genetics and Synthase, of course, are two real leaders here in the UK. And I think it's a healthy spread, actually. And I think that's probably reflected in the United States as well, actually.
I'm curious, Dick or Paul, what either of you think about the whole vision of synthetic biology is that we can make biology easier to engineer. So that involves a lot of tools, a lot of platforms, a lot of foundational technologies. But as soon as companies meet with investors, the investors, depending which investor, but a lot of the investors, they want to see what's the product, what's the value that you're adding to the marketplace. Right. Some investors find it difficult to invest in tools and platforms. So maybe you can just comment on that. Maybe Paul, do you want to go first?
Well, that's a very important point.
Well, I mean, I think it's a tension. Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think we got
time delay.
Time delay. Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
No. I was just going to say, I think there are opportunities at the tools and services level for sure. It depends on the investor type. It's true that is a tension, as Dick just was about to say, between investors and how they could see the companies grow and how they could exit and what their reward structure would be. But I think at this point, if you have the right tool and technology, I think you could make some serious inroads into the market. So, but I think some of these companies are going to morph into product. They'll have a really cool technology, and then suddenly investors will kind of say, well, hey, look, why don't we start moving into making a new biomaterial or a new natural product or something? And these companies will then apply their really amazing technology to be, market leaders in developing those kind of products. So we'll wait and see. But it's an interesting question.
I think if you look at some other sectors, which are more mature, you often see a similar phenomenon, which is that investors often want quick wins by, investing for 3 years and then getting out in terms of a particular application area. But the people in other sectors who really score are the ones who really master the fundamental technology and then are in it for the long term. And I personally believe that's going to be the case here.
And of course, we could look at one of the biggest tool companies around, which is Illumina, and who's been very successful. And you can look at the success of Twist. So it's a shame we don't have any investors on the webinar to comment on the trends that they see in terms of investment in tools, investment in platforms. I think it goes in phases, whether they are excited about these particular areas or if they want to focus more on applications.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they read the market all the time, obviously.
Right. So moving on to this chart, which shows the investment over time in the UK. Paul, I wonder if you could comment on this. This is from your survey last year.
I think it's a healthy growth. There was a bit of a dip from the highs of 2015 and 2016 and 2017, but it's still pretty impressive. So the sector's raised over 465 million in risk capital since 2015, which is not an insignificant sum of money. And 90% of the funding between 2015 and 2018 has actually gone into seed and early stage companies. So only 10% of what you're looking at on this graph has actually gone into any companies that are at growth stage. So therefore, the UK scene, if you like, is very early stage seed funding type of sector at the moment. And I think that's kind of exciting as well. Other things too, so this increase in early stage investment is also happening in 2017. There's a 5-fold increase in investment in seed, venture stage, significant increase in the latter. And the other thing we've observed, actually, which is just an updated report on this, there's been a really interesting influx of foreign investment into the UK since 2017. And that's continuing that trend. And I think that's kind of interesting. There seems to be a bigger appetite for UK companies at startups in SynBio from external investors than from the domestic funding market. And that's something that SynbiCITE is focusing on in the next period of our strategic development, to identify why that is, and two, to increase the domestic market investment opportunities, if you like. But it's really good because it kind of says that internationally, if you like, the UK startup scene is getting validation, particularly when you're attracting, investments from the US into the UK. So in some ways it's a great position, but we need to increase all of this totally.
So Paul, I wonder if you can, if we can celebrate here some of the investors who've been engaging with SynbiCITE and the UK ecosystem, because I think it's really important to thank them for their engagement, for looking at the UK as a potential market, so that we get to see more investment going into that stage. So are there any particular that you'd like to call out, either domestically in the UK or outside the UK?
Well, it's a little bit tricky because some of these recent investments haven't been publicly announced. But I think I'd like to take my hat off to, there's a patient capital fund being set up called 8GT, which I'm sure Dick will comment on. And that's looking very promising in terms of its appetite for investment in early stage companies in synthetic biology for the longer term. I think that's kind of probably one of the most exciting local built investment funds that's happening at the moment. So, of course, so I do a shout out for them.
Dick, anybody that you'd like to call out in particular?
If I can respond. Yes, I think I would like to, in a way, I mean, there are a number of examples, but one I'd like to call out is Amadeus Capital. So Amadeus Capital is a big VC in the UK, essentially headed up by somebody called Herman Hauser, who's had a long history of funding tech in the UK, and they are now really interested in synthetic biology. And I think that's really interesting because they are a mainstream VC here in the UK, and they've invested in companies like Synthase here. So I think that's very good. As far as Paul's comment about 8GT, again, I think that's with the patient capital, I think that's a really, really interesting development. The difference there is that they're in it for the long haul. They expect to be investing over at least a decade, and they rely heavily on experts in various fields. They don't just work on synthetic biology, they cover a range of different types of technology, but they rely heavily on experts in the field to, if you like, de-risk the investments. And that's again an interesting development, I think, certainly for the UK.
Great. So that's the 8 Great Technologies Fund. That's founded by the Right Honourable David Willits, who's been one of our speakers at SynBioBeta in the past. And then Herman Hauser, Amadeus Capital, who's also been one of our featured speakers at SynBioBeta event in the UK in the past. And I know, so Herman Hauser and Amadeus have invested in Synthase. They've also invested in Evernetics. And Herman has a very rich background both in tech and in biotech. He was one of the first investors in Solexa that then became sold and became Illumina, the core technology of Illumina, and then also in ARM, the microprocessor.
Well, ARM was his big first investment, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I agree. Tell us about the Rainbow Seed Fund. This was set up to fund early stage investment in the UK. Paul, maybe you can comment on that.
Well, I think it's just it's another way of trying to essentially harness public funding to accelerate commercialization, as is what SynbiCITE does. So Rainbow Seed Fund has funding public money, if you like, which has then been levered in to lever further money from private sector to essentially invest in very early stage seed companies. And so that public money is being really well used, I think. And so so that's essentially the model that SynbiCITE is offering, because what we do is we're publicly funded, and our job is to try and create and nucleate startups, spin out small companies, mentor them, provide them with access to business acumen, also provide them with access to our foundry so they can get data, and to get them completely into a stage where they're investable and where they can go to Rainbow Seed Fund and get, good seed funding. So have a real investable opportunity. So that's kind of our role. I think the UK has really got that really nicely working. So SynbiCITE doesn't take equity. We're not trying to create value for ourselves. We're here purely to facilitate the growth of the sector within the UK using public funding. Of course, we want to leave a private funding as well, but that's also ongoing. But I think that whole model is proving to be quite attractive here, and I think it's getting good traction, and I think investors like it as well, because it sort of acts as a sort of...
And the other thing is that the public funding that Paul's talking about is not a loan, it's an investment by the essentially by the UK governments.
Yeah. So I think Rainbow Seed Fund is a really good example of how you can put public funding to good use.
So I'm looking now at the slide where we're looking at the total investment in synthetic biology between 2002 to 2016. A lot of these companies are familiar. Green Biologics is using Clostridium for the production of biobutanol. Oxitec is doing engineered mosquitoes for knocking down dengue and Zika populations. Oxford Biotrans is doing transformation chemistry for Nucotone, that's grapefruit flavor, or Sphere Fluidics, it's making hardware for mass spec. Touchlight Genetics and Oxford Genetics are both going to be speaking at the event in October. Touchlight's doing plasmids for gene therapy, and Touchlight's doing gene synthesis, and Oxford is doing plasmids for cell engineering. And Synthase, of course, that we talked about in terms of a software play. Are there any others on here that you'd like to particularly highlight in the UK ecosystem?
Well, you've covered quite a few there that are pretty important, actually. No, I think the representation you gave there was very representative of the scene going on.
Yep, I agree.
Excellent. So I wanted to move on and talk a little bit about the global event that we have coming up in San Francisco. I know a lot of the people watching the webinar are interested in partnership and business development opportunities there. So we wanted to go over some of the sessions that we're having. We want to talk a little bit about the Partnering Lounge, which SynbiCITE is sponsoring, and also look at some of the attendees that are coming to the event, particularly from corporations that you might not think might be interested in synthetic biology, but we're seeing a growing number of corporations coming to the conference and looking to partner with people. So the main conference is from October 1 through October 3, and that's part of Synthetic Biology Week, which is that whole week, and we'll come on to Synthetic Biology Week shortly. So in particular, as I mentioned, SynbiCITE is a sponsor of the event this year, and you're going to be sponsoring the Partnering Lounge, which is over 20 different tables available in the lobby, and a partnering app where people can see all the attendees and can select who they want to meet with and set up one-on-one meetings. So that's part of something that we've got to look forward to later in the year. I wanted to announce two of the big keynotes. We're doing a session on synthetic biology and neuroscience. So Brian Johnson, who founded the OS Fund, and he also founded Braintree, which sold to PayPal a few years back. And he's got his new startup. He's the CEO of a company called Kernel, and Kernel is making neural implants to allow people to connect devices via implants that they put in their brains. So very good for paraplegics who can't use a particular piece of their body, but also good for the future and what the future holds for being able to interact between machine and the brain. And Ed Boyden in particular, who's a specialist in synthetic biology and neuroscience, and he's at the MIT Media Lab. So we're going to have a very interesting session all around tools and technologies for synthetic biology and neuroscience. Some of the other key themes that we're having at the meeting, the main one that we always like to follow is Bio meets Tech. We're dedicated to the growth of the ecosystem, and a big part of that is bringing together the bio community and the tech community. Next, we have the next industrial revolution, in particular talking about biomanufacturing and how companies are paving the way for biology-inspired industrial revolutions. The bioeconomy culture, we have a lot of discussion around the culture and the ethics of synthetic biology. That's going to be covered. And then biopharma and health. There's a lot of money in the biopharma industry and the healthcare industry. And so we've got sessions on engineered cell therapies, we've got sessions on engineering the microbiome, and sessions on antibody engineering. We have another 2 sessions, I think, on energy and the environment. In particular, Pivot Bio is one of the sponsors this year, and they're going to be talking about their crop additives, these microbes that can live in the root nodules around corn and soy plants and help them to grow by fixing their own nitrogen. And we've also got a reverse pitch session of environmental sustainability issues that are found around the world and how synthetic biology might be able to address those. And then finally, we have food and ag, and we always have a lot of food and ag companies come to the event. Many of them are making new kinds of proteins or new kinds of flavors and fragrances. So we have a whole number of sessions on that. Here's some of the draft conference sessions, and these will be finalized in the coming 2 weeks. And so if you're not signed up for our weekly newsletter, then you should do, and you'll receive as soon as we've got these finalized. We've got a session on why protein is a killer app that's sponsored by Codexis, looking at protein engineering. We have a session on engineering the microbiome, as I mentioned, which is a very popular field right now. And a panel discussion on educating, incubating, and accelerating that I think is going to be very popular. We have Greg Scott from China Bio, who's going to be speaking about synthetic biology in China and what's happening there. And we also have George Bethan University, who's going to be coming to speak. Apologies, no, I think he's at Tsinghua University. He's going to be coming to speak. We have the investment panel this year with some very interesting investors, including Annie Hazelhurst, Matt Hocko from DCVC, and representatives from Mubadala, which is an investment firm out of Abu Dhabi, who's recently made a number of investments in the field. We're having a fireside chat with Jason Kelly on scaling up the biofab and what's going on at Ginkgo. And we have a cyanobacterial engineering session, which is sponsored by RIL, the Indian-based company that's doing algal engineering. And we have a whole session on chemicals and materials. And Checkerspot is going to be one of those companies that just raised $5 million to make new sustainable materials. They're going to be speaking there. And we have a session on cellular agriculture, which is going to include Ryan Bethan from his new fund, which is making vegan-based dog food, which I think will be an interesting treat for everybody. I'm not sure if there'll be free samples there to try, but we can hope. And one of the new sessions that we have this year is on DNA data storage. And again, that's sponsored by the SynBio Research Consortium, which is looking at how DNA data storage is going to grow as an industry. And Victor Stock will be there speaking about that and a new report that they're going to be launching on DNA data storage at the conference. Paul, you're going to be speaking in the session on cell-free synthetic biology. I wondered if you could give us a little bit of a heads up on the kinds of things that you're going to be talking about and why you think cell-free synthetic biology is such an exciting area.
Okay, this is my pitch, 5-minute pitch for cell-free. It's I think it's okay. So we've been working on cell-free systems for a while, and basically what it allows you to do, it has all the machinery to essentially decode your genetic designs. So the reason it's very attractive is that it's essentially an assay format kind of machinery. It's not a living cell, so it's not a living cell, but you have all of the machinery from the living cell, which can essentially as I said, screen and prototype your design. So as a prototyping platform, it's looking really very powerful. So when you're designing complex circuitry, you can test it in cell-free, see if it works, see if it doesn't, whatever, and get a good feel for that. It's also really good for biosensors. So Jim Collins and Keith Pardee and our lab a little bit been working on cell-free biosensors, and they're very useful because you can freeze dry the extracts onto paper, and you can develop paper-based sensing devices which could be used in the field, developing countries. It's really good for making proteins, which traditionally what it's always been used for. And so there's the opportunity of distributed manufacturing. So cell-free systems being used to manufacture vaccines, antibodies, or whatever, therapeutic proteins, but in a much more local, decentralized way. So that's exciting. As a discovery platform, it's really got real power. So a lot of people are interested in natural product discovery. And therefore, one way of trying to discover these natural products is by taking the genetic material, with the genetic code for the different biosynthetic pathways that we think produce natural products, and to try and prototype them in a cell-free system, and particularly cell-free systems from the organism where these natural biosynthetic pathways come from. So we've been looking at Streptomyces, which is a antibiotic-producing organism, and using cell-free there to look at, see if we can discover some new antibiotics. And so discovery, prototyping, protein, distributed manufacturing, it can do everything, basically.
Excellent. Well, I'm super excited about cell-free. I'm definitely a convert, so I'm looking forward to that. And then Dick, we haven't announced the session that you're going to be speaking in yet, but I think it's going to be around internationalization of synthetic biology and a panel discussion around what's happening around the globe. So moving on to the next part of the presentation, which is to talk about biostrategies. And what we're working with Mark Bunger, who recently left Lux Research and is now working at his own firm called Innovation Lab. And Mark's going to be working with us on a number of corporations, bringing them to the conference, who are looking at develop a strategy, helping to partner with the industry. So in particular, we have 5 sessions that Mark's going to be working on, one in food and ag, one in healthcare, one in electronics, one on materials and chemistry, and one on consumer goods and synthetic biology. So that's something very interesting to look forward to. We have a huge number of investors coming. Here are just a sample of them from all around the world, and a lot of them are looking for new opportunities to invest in. That's why they come to the conference. And some of the sample attendees that I thought might be of interest to folks, we have quite a few from the biopharma industry, folks from Merck, Amgen, some from the chemical industry, BASF, for example. We have representatives from L'Oreal, some from the electronics industry like Hitachi. So a lot of large corporations are coming to the conference looking to partner and looking for new opportunities. Some of the UK companies that are speaking this year, we've already talked about many of them: Oxford Genetics and Touchlight. Cambridge Consultants are going to be at the event, Procarium, which we talked about, and Cell-Free Tech, Bento Biolabs, and TTP Lab Tech. So I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail on these. We talked about Ryan Carwood, who's the founder of Oxford Genetics, and how they have a platform for plasmid development for cell line engineering. Touchlight Genetics, where we have a DNA platform for DNA synthesis. That's with their vector doggy bone DNA, which has a lot of different applications. Dick, did you have a comment on Touchlight?
Not particularly, except I do think they're an exciting company and they've got some very interesting technologies. So definitely worth coming to hear what they have to say.
Agreed, and I actually visited their news site in I've forgotten where it is in London. It's next to where's
Putney.
the maze?
Oh,
Putney. Okay.
Hampton.
Yeah, Hampton.
Yeah. So I visited Johnny Olson, the founder of Touchlight, last year, and it's very impressive to see what they're building there. Cambridge Consultants, which is partnering with Synthase on the implementation and the rollout of the Synthase and the Anther platform. Richard Hammond will be there. And Procarium, we talked already about vaccine delivery platform, and Ted will be speaking at the conference. And one of the new startups that I'm very excited about is called Hack Science, and they've got a piece of automation hardware for doing mammalian cell culture, and Ignacio Wiletz is going to be speaking. And this gives me a good opportunity to mention Synthetic Biology Week, as Hack Science are also going to be running a hackathon as part of Synthetic Biology Week on the evening of October 5th. And I'll come back to Synthetic Biology Week in a second when we talk about some of the other satellite events. And Thomas Meany, who's also going to be speaking in the synthetic biology, in the cell-free synthetic biology session. Now, Thomas Meany is involved in a very exciting project that you first told me about, Paul, around labs and shipping containers. Can you? We put it in the newsletter last week, but can you tell us a little more about it?
Well, I'm really excited by this project. So in West London, next to a 100-year-old market called Shepherd's Bush Market, 104 years old, Thomas and his partner Helene Steiner have set up essentially they call it OpenCell, And basically what they've done is they've taken a bunch of shipping containers, which were on this site next to the market. And essentially they're converting them into essentially biotech labs and for biotech startups. And Helene comes from a kind of designer orientated background. She works in the fashion department at the Royal College of Art. And so there's a kind of really interesting crossover happening there where they're trying to attract really creatives down into this space to explore the opportunities of crossover between SynBio, new materials, design, products, just really, really cool stuff. And I think it will be the first kind of open biotech sort of incubator, if I can call it that, because the rents are going to be really low. There's going to be a community being built up there. There's a lot of great kind of feeling and atmosphere there already. So, you know, if you want to do a micro company in London, that's the only place to do it because I think you'll get great facilities, and it's just a really exciting project. And I think it's probably one of the few open kind of biotech sort of facilities, if you like, in the world, from what I can gather. So I had never seen it before, and so Dick and I are putting a lot of effort and support into it to really get that going, and financially as well from SynbiCITE to try and make sure that we create the opportunity there, because London is incredibly creative and it's got so many different creative industries here. And I think OpenCell will become another creative bubble, which will lead to all sorts of amazing opportunities. So please go and check out the website, contact Helene and Thomas. And if you're in the UK and you want to do a startup, then come and see them and do it there, basically.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also particularly excited about it. I think it's an absolutely excellent example of how, you know, things begin to develop spontaneously. I mean, as Paul says, it's in next to 104-year-old market, but it's essentially in 44-ton containers. That's their labs and very low rents. But we see this as one of the entry points into the SynbiCITE pipeline, which again is exciting because it means we can look at the genesis of these companies within that new development, and then feed them through into proof of concept projects, and then eventually through into much more substantial funding through VCs. So it's very exciting. And
the other point about it, it's going to be also create community interactions. There's going to be a kind of DIY bio community lab there. There's an ability to engage more broadly in public dialogue around the tech and around what it could offer. And actually Shepherd's Bush market itself has got a long history in fashion materials. And there's a lot of, you can go buy the most amazing materials in the market next door to where OpenCell is. So it's a very cool development, which we're hoping to help really get off the ground, and also to end up having a kind of we have a London Fashion Week and we have a London Design Week. Well, I think we're going to try and create a London Biodesign Week, and I think OpenCell are going to create that opportunity for us, and it should be really cool, super cool.
Yep,
that sounds fantastic. Paul, you describing the market next door where you could buy any kinds of materials. I'm pretty excited whenever I visit Shenzhen in China to visit the electronics stores where the markets you can go and buy any kind of transistor or piece of electronics. Isn't it a shame that we don't yet have that for biology? We don't yet, even in the Bay Area, even in Boston, you don't have a kind of a biology superstore where you could just go and get whatever size filter you want or whatever size test tube.
Yeah.
Kind of plastic.
Well, maybe Shepherd's Bush Market would be the first place in London that does it.
Exactly.
That would be
we'll never know. Yeah.
And Bento is also one of the SynbiCITE companies that's based out of the incubator. Are they still in the incubator, or have they graduated?
No, they've moved out the incubator. They're now actually at a new development, which is part of King's College. King's College have converted some old buildings into much better incubators, and they're there. So they've moved out of Imperial. We're still very involved with them. We don't give up on our companies. We see them through. And I think personally they've done a fantastic job. You know, Bethan Wolfenden, the co-founder, has really taken this whole idea through to what is now a pretty advanced stage. And what I've been tracking is how they've actually turned what is a project into something which they can now pretty much mass produce, and they're well on the way to being able to do that. And I think that's really exciting, and it shows the whole a different aspects of the whole scaling problem in terms of synthetic biology. So I think they're doing really well.
Excellent. And Bethan is also going to be speaking at the conference in October.
Cool.
And then TTP LabTech, which is a UK-based automation company, and Dawn's going to be speaking at the conference as well. And so moving on to Synthetic Biology Week, Build a Better World with Biology, that's our slogan. Come celebrate bioengineering in art, design, industry, and our daily lives with many different activities ranging from lab tours to hikes to workshops and talks all throughout the Bay Area. And that's starting on September the 30th, and it's going through Saturday, October the 6th. And that's brought to you by Twist and LabSite and Ginkgo and Pivot. And SynbiCITE has an event going on that's a showcase for UK companies in particular, and that's taking place at the offices of Pennington and Manches, and that's on Monday, October the 1st from 3 until 4:30. So there's going to be a number of UK companies coming in early for the conference and taking part in that showcase.
Yeah, we're very excited to host that.
Yeah, that's excellent. It's going to be one of the highlights of the week. Some other side sessions that we have going on as part of Synthetic Biology Week. Dominic Falco, who is with Deep Science Ventures, he's got a workshop going on the evening of October 1st. He's going to be, that's all about learning about the early stages of science venture creation, including how scientists and engineers can start companies, pre-ideas, pre-team. So that's again going to be an interesting session, interesting workshop. I just want to take a moment to thank all of the sponsors of the October event, including SynbiCITE and all of the other sponsors who are going to be there, and for after parties, for receptions, for sponsored breaks, sponsored sessions. So it really wouldn't be the great event it is without all of these great startups and all of these great sponsors. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to go over to the Q&A. So if you have any Q&A, then you can just type them into the webinar box, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so we can come back to the webinar. And so if we have any questions, then I can see them here. We have one from Andre. He says, I'm from Indonesia, in which the synthetic biology is still considered to be foreign by its citizens. Could you recommend what to do to introduce and initiate synthetic biology research projects in such a country? Thank you. Now, Paul, I think you've done quite a lot of outreach with the developing countries. In particular, I know you were in Kenya recently.
Yeah.
What experience have you had, and what could you translate to Andre for what he's trying to do in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think one of the key things I found was to find out, one, what the capabilities are, two, find out if there are some of the really important problems that affect the local citizens, either in a big city or in a small village, and find out some of those technological problems that you think synthetic biology or biotechnology could tackle. And so I think one of the ways that, and then to start engagement, right? And to find out who the right people are to engage with in these countries. And also to use it more as a sort of educational thing. So when I went to Kenya, I said to my Kenyan colleagues, look what's going on in the world, right? Look at all of this amazing disruptive technology that's been developed in this, that, and the other. You could do this, right? If you have all the capabilities, you have all of the brains, you have all of the creative thinking. And it's just a matter of trying to, share knowledge with people in a very open and transparent way so that so there's no hidden things here, right? So you know exactly what we're doing, what everyone's doing. And obviously it's up to the local communities to decide, one, if this technology could develop into something very useful for them and tackle some really major problems for them. And two, culturally, how does it sit? And, genetic modification doesn't sit great in East Africa, but there's a lot of interest in some of the applications of synthetic biology, and therefore you would need to go outreach, engagement, community engagement, and all of the sort of things around that. But so I would say the first step is knowledge sharing. let's just share. This is a global world. Everyone should be able to use this technology. Everyone, and I just feel quite strongly about that. So, there should be there's not huge barriers to entry. It's not as if we're talking about silicon chip design, right? I mean, synthetic biology can be done in a community lab. It can be done in a high school. It can be done at home, or it can be done in a big research lab that I've got just here. It's an amazing technology that it can be accessible at so many different levels. So that's not really helping you, is it? I don't think, but it's kind of where I'm coming from. I think it's sort of got to get in there and just really passionately fight for this and sort of share knowledge, basically.
Yeah, I think it is helping, Paul, because it's saying start with the end in mind, start with the application area, and then build an open, accessible community that wants to share knowledge. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
Dick, any thoughts if you were in Indonesia?
I have. Obviously, I would completely endorse what Paul is saying. Paul's led the Kenyan initiative, but I was out there as well. But the other point I would add is that I think having done the groundwork that Paul's talking about, is quite important to tie back to some expert groups to give you assistance. And what I feel about Indonesia is that it's not a million miles away from Singapore.
Exactly.
And of course, the National University of Singapore is one that Paul and I work at quite a bit of the time. They have an extremely strong synthetic biology activity there, and the Indonesians should link in with them.
Absolutely. Very good point.
Great. And also, Andre, if you want to email me, I have a few connections in Indonesia from when we ran our event in Singapore. They contacted me and they spoke at the event. So you can drop me an email, john.cumbers@synbiobeta.com, and I'd be happy to reach out and see if they'd like to connect with you. If you have any additional questions, then please type them into the box. We have a question from Tara Hill, and I presume this is the Tara Hill who's at Twist in the UK. So hi, Tara, thanks for your question. She has a question for you, Paul. It says, you mentioned the increase in foreign investment in the UK since 2017. And she says it's great that Brexit doesn't seem to have had a detrimental effect so far. What would you say to foreign companies with a view to setting up location in the UK in the future?
Wow. Not an easy question, Tara. Thanks, Tara. Well, I'm going to say yes, because for obvious reasons. I mean, ultimately, the UK is a very pragmatic country, and what will come out of this whole thing will be a pragmatic solution, because there are so many opportunities for Europe and for the UK to continue working very closely together. So although what you read in newspapers and all the rest of it, I think at the end of the day, there will be some changes, but I think it will allow new opportunities. The reason to come to the UK is there's been a huge public investment into synthetic biology research. We have really fantastic synthetic biology research going on in 7 centers around the UK. We have SynbiCITE helping to promote and translate those technologies into micro companies, startup companies. We've got this growing scene. So for companies, for investors who want to come into this space, I think it's absolutely ideal. For companies to relocate, I think it's also ideal, because as we grow this ecosystem, there's going to be opportunities to feed this ecosystem as well as feeding the European market. And whatever happens, there's going to be absolute a brokered agreement that is beneficial to both sides, because the alternative I don't think works for anyone. And I just think pragmatism and practical realities will prevail here.
Excellent.
Go ahead. Can I comment? Yes, I mean, I'm really quite close to government thinking in this area, and there's a very open policy in the UK for inward investment in synthetic biology. And I also think, whether you're for this or against it, that historically synthetic biology developments have been in places like the UK and US, not so much in mainland Europe. And so, UK is and will remain to be, in my opinion, a very good centre for investment in terms of synthetic biology. And as I say, the UK government, extremely supportive of incoming companies into this country in the sector.
Great, excellent. We have a question from Ramesses. He says, hi, I'm a university student. I'm interested in pursuing synthetic biology post-graduation. What places in the US would you say are going to have the strongest SynBio communities in the future? And also what places in the UK? Dick, maybe you want to to take that to begin with?
Yeah, so this question is US based, correct?
It's both. So maybe you can comment on where
well, let's say, yeah. So I think for me, an easy entree into what's going on in terms of the US and where jobs, etc., are going to develop is to really contact the Engineering Biology Research Consortium, because that's a group that is very on top of both the academic and industrial developments within the US. And you can get some pretty good, if you go onto their website, just Engineering Biology Research Consortium, you'll be able to make all the appropriate contacts. I suppose the short answer in terms of the UK is contact us, because we're very on top of what's going on in the UK. If you want to do fundamental research, then there are 7 major research centres in synthetic biology in the UK, and we can give you access to all those people and the directors. And in terms of companies, we can also do that through SynbiCITE. So I would suggest that's probably the best way through this.
Great. Any additional thoughts, Paul?
No, I'm just saying there's a whole lot of master programs now, both in the UK, particularly in the UK, on synthetic biology. So if you wanted to do a 1-year master's program just to get your feet dipped in the water of synthetic biology, then there are many places that offer that now.
Great, excellent. We have another question. This is from Mariano and our team that's coming via Twitter. And it says, can you tell us more about the London DNA Foundry that you mentioned? Can you talk about its mission and offerings, and who would be appropriate to partner with the London DNA Foundry? Paul, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, sure.
Why don't you kick off, Paul, on this one?
Okay, the London DNA Foundry is essentially a key part of SynbiCITE's mission. It's there to engage with industry, with startup companies, and also with academia. But it's essentially the people who work in it are ex-pharma people. So it's run in a very sort of professional way. What it does is it offers a series of essentially opportunities to do high throughput screening, high throughput DNA assembly, automatic cell transformations, and all automatic characterization of parts and things. So it offers a kind of all of the molecular biology techniques and technologies in an integrated, automated way. And it's still developing. So foundries are pretty new, and so everyone's finding out how to really do this properly, and we've been doing it for a few years now. So it's there to serve a whole broad set of communities, actually. But I would probably say that one of our biggest focuses is to try and really develop industrial engagement and startup engagement through the Foundry. Dick, go ahead.
Yeah.
Dick, did you have anything to comment?
No, I think, as Paul says, the London DNA Foundry, which is an integral part of SynbiCITE, is industrially oriented. I mean, that's not to say we don't support some academic projects, but in the main, we're very interested in working with industry, particularly SMEs and startups, although we also do large projects for big multinationals. So, the difference between our foundry and a number of others is that we are very industry oriented, I would say.
And we're offering training and internship programs as well as part of this. So one of the big strategic initiatives of the UK government is to train and skill the next generation of workforce in synthetic biology. That's one of our missions as well. So we would see the DNA Foundry as a key part of that whole activity.
Excellent. Well, we are coming to the... yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just make one final... I was just going to say that I think Paul and I both feel that, there are 2 key developments in terms of synthetic biology, and one of them is foundries. I mean, obviously there is fermentation facilities, but the other is, software development in terms of CAD tools, et cetera, et cetera. So foundries are definitely an incredibly important component of the development of synthetic biology.
Excellent. So we're coming up to the top of the hour, so we're going to wrap up. I wanted to again highlight SynbiCITE's sponsorship and participation of the October event, in particular the partnership lounge that we mentioned, but also there's going to be a showcase event for UK companies to exhibit on the exhibit floor of the main event. Dick, if people want to take part in that and they want to join the SynbiCITE delegation that's going to be coming over, who should they get in touch with?
Us.
Well, it should get in touch with us, basically. I mean, both Paul and I will be there throughout the week. We are now working with the International Department of Trade to put this whole thing together. So contact us.
Yeah.
And the contact information is on the SynbiCITE website?
Yeah.
Great.
Just contact both of us, and then just to make sure that one of us will get it.
If it's not up there right now, it will be very soon.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you all for joining us on this webinar. Paul, thank you in particular,
Thanks,
and Dick,
John.
thank you as well. This has been a fantastic overview of global developments in the synthetic biology ecosystem with a focus on the UK. And we hope to see as many of you as possible at the October event, where you can meet a lot of the UK companies that we talked about today.
Great.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.